best friends I've ever had, Mort Utley. Give him a big hand, will you?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. How many of you are here for the first time? You're going to have the greatest summer you have ever had in all of your lives. You're going to earn more money than you ever thought was possible in a 13-week period, but far more important than that money. If you go out on the book field this summer and do the things you've been trained to do in the way you've been trained to do them, you're going to build within yourselves some qualities that will follow you and help you the rest of your lives. You will develop some habits of life. And these qualities and these habits will make you better husbands, better wives, better fathers, better mothers, better business people, better Christians, better neighbors. No matter what you do or become in this world, you will be better at it because of the Southwestern experience. I have said for 30 years, counting today, that coming to Nashville is the greatest experience of my year. To stand on a platform somewhere in this city and look into the faces of young people like you who stand for what you stand for, who are willing to train and to commit yourselves to work harder and tougher than you have ever worked in all of your lives. It just does something for me and makes my year better. I want to thank you for letting me share this hour in your life. And I'd like to share with you, first of all, 5 principles of success. 5 things that if you will do and be this summer, I guarantee you that you will get what you want out of the summer. Number 1, think big. Think big. The Bible was a book of people who thought big. When Jesus gave the Great Commission, he didn't say go into this village or this state or this nation. He thought bigger than that. He said go into all the world. You can't get any bigger than that, can you? The Apostle Paul said, I press on toward the prize of the mark of the high, not a low, not a medium, not an average, but the high calling. When I talk about thinking big, I'm reminded the little boy was trying to sell a dog. Had a little dirty dog out by the sidewalk. Had a little sign said, dog for sale, 25 cents. He had been trying to sell that dog for about 5, 6, 7 weeks. There was a man who walked from his house to the bus every morning to go to work, and he passed this kid. When he got off the bus at night to go home, he passed him again. After he had seen this kid out there trying to sell that dog about 5, 6, 7 days, he stopped one night and said, Sonny, you having trouble selling that dog? He said, I sure am. He said, would you like some help? He said, yes, sir. Man said, you know what your problem is? Little boy said, no. He said, you don't think big enough. Who wants a 25-cent dog? Take that dog home and give him a bath. Brush his hair, make him look good. Raise your price, and you'll sell him. Next night, the man got off the bus, started for home. That kid was out there with that dog all washed and brushed, a great big yellow ribbon around his neck, and a huge sign that said, dog for sale, $10,000. Man said, now, Sonny, I told you to think big, but that's ridiculous. Nobody's going to pay $10,000 for that dog. The little boy said, mister, you told me to think big, and that's the biggest number I could think of, and I'll sell him for $10,000. Well, the man didn't want to discourage this Southwestern salesperson, so he went on home. Next morning, he started for the bus. The boy was gone. The dog was gone. Sign was still there. The little boy had crossed out for sale and printed in great big letters, sold. The man thought this was worth being late to work for. Found the house where the kid lived, said, Sonny, I see that you sold your dog. He said, yes, sir, and I want to thank you for helping me think big. The man said, how much did you get for him? He said, I got $10,000 for him. Man said, no, don't kid me. I know he's sold because he's gone and you're gone. But tell me the truth. How much did you really get for that dog? Little boy said, mister, I told you I got $10,000 for that dog. The man said, how in the world did you sell that dog for $10,000? He said, I took 2 $5,000 cats for him. Now that's ridiculous. But let me tell you something. When you think big, something always happens. Do you think that the students who the first week last summer sold 250 units thought they would sell 250 units when they left home on Monday morning? No. They thought they would sell 500 units. The students who sold 500 units in a week, they didn't go out on Monday morning believing they could sell 500 units. They thought they could sell 1,000. And a few students who sold in the 800s of units didn't go out thinking they could sell 800 units. They thought they could sell 1,500 units. You have to think big, and something will happen in your life. Now, thinking big isn't the same to everybody. You don't have to think as big as someone else to think big for you, but you reach farther than you've ever reached before. There is within you more potential, more power, more ability, more possibilities than you ever dreamed that you had inside of you. So you leave Nashville with the belief that you can become a great salesperson, and you will get what you want out of the summer. Number two, if you get what you want out of the summer, you have to know what you want and set goals to reach what you want. Most people set goals before they determine what they want. What do you want out of the summer? Not compared to somebody else. What do you want out of this summer? In addition to the great principles you're going to put into your life and the habits you're going to develop, how many units do you want to sell? How much money do you want to save this summer? Determine what you want before you set your goals. If you set goals without knowing who you are and where you want to go, that's dangerous, and that can be destructive. But determine what you individually want. Then you set your goals to get it. Set a goal for the entire summer, whether it be 12, 13, 14, or 15 weeks, whatever number of weeks you're going to work. Then break that summer's goal down into weekly goals. How much are you going to sell each of those weeks? Then break each week down into 7 or 6 daily goals that you work. Then break each day down into 3 4.5-hour periods. Set a goal for each 4.5 hours of this summer. And when you reach that goal, or when that time has expired, forget it and go on to the next goal. This we call crystallizing your goals down to something that is meaningful to you. Let me show you what I mean. Suppose I brought you an elephant, and I said, I want you to eat this animal. Is there anybody that would do it? No. It would completely overpower you. But if I brought you a small piece of elephant meat every day and said, eat this, if you didn't know what it was, you probably would, until the elephant was all gone. So set your goals for each 4.5-hour period. And then when the summer is gone, the hours will have run into the days and the days into the weeks into your summer, and you'll get what you want out of the summer. The world makes way for the person who knows where he or she is going. So know where you're going and what you want and what your goals are this summer. Now, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, don't set goals just as to how much you want to sell. Set your primary goals the first 2 or 3 weeks for the hours that you're going to work, the demos you're going to give, the number of doors you will knock on, the number of people you will meet. Win the success coin. I have never known a student who won that success coin who didn't succeed in the summer. Because you see, if in the first 2 or 3 weeks you do the things that are necessary to win that success coin, you're going to develop the habits that will earn you the money that you want the rest of the summer. Now remember this, working 75 hours a week doesn't mean just walking the streets and ringing doorbells. Work in the Southwestern experience is getting into the houses, giving a certain number of demos. And if you don't give the demos, in a certain number of houses, you are not really working 75 hours a day. But if you will do that, you will get what you want out of this summer. Number 3, if you get what you want out of the summer, you have to be prepared for the summer. We live in a world where most people do the things that they do unprepared. Do your homework. Be really prepared. I'd like to think this morning about 2 things in your preparation. First, knowledge, and second, skill. It would be impossible for the Southwestern Company to bring you into Nashville and in 1 week give you all of the knowledge that you need to go out and sell these books. And yet you have to have that knowledge. You can't get excited about anything. I don't care whether it's baseball, basketball, football, movies, anything else, unless you know something about it. You can't talk enthusiastically about anything and convincingly to somebody else unless you know something about it. So learn enough about the books that you're going to show people that you are really sold on them, so that you can talk intelligently and enthusiastically to the people. That knowledge will pay off for you in the sale of units. It isn't enough just to know about the books. You need to know words with which to present the books. The Southwestern Company has given you a sales manual. They've given you approaches, sales talks, answers to objections, closes, ways to get the money, ways to get referred leads and pre-approach information so that you have somebody else to call on. I hope nobody in this room feels about those things like I did when I first went into the life insurance business. On the first day of a sales training school, they gave us some pieces of paper. There were approaches. You see, all businesses are just alike. Approaches, sales talks, answers to objections, closes, ways to get the money, ways to get referred leads. They said, learn these because on the last day of the sales school, we're going to call all of the agents in this big agency in, and you're going to have to give them in front of them. Well, I learned them. I knew them word for word. On the last day of that sales school, they called me up in front of that agency, gave me a prospect, said, all right, Mr. Utley, let's hear you use what you have learned. I gave the approach, word for word. I gave the sales talk. When the prospect objected, I gave those answers to objections. When I got ready to close, I used those closes. When I asked for the check, I used the words on those pieces of paper. When I asked for referred leads, I used the things that they had given me. When I finished, an older man stood up in that room and he said, Mr. Utley, if you'll give those to enough qualified prospects every week, you'll earn more money than your wife can spend. He didn't know my wife. But he knew something about selling that I didn't know. I thought, if you think I'm going to give those Mary Had a Little Lamb stuff to my friends, you're crazy. I've been talking for years. I was on the radio for 3 years. I don't need that silly stuff. I put it down in the bottom drawer of my desk, and I went out to use Mort Utley's words. Did pretty good the first week, had a lot of friends. Sales went down the second week, down the third week. No sales the fourth week. No sales the fifth week. No sales the sixth week. That older man saw me in the hall one day and said, Mort, have you been sick? I said, no, why? He said, I haven't seen your name on the production list. I said, nobody will buy. He said, would you like some help? I was like the kid selling the dog. I said, yes, sir. He said, if you will make 5 appointments for next Tuesday, I'll go with you and do the selling, and I'll give you all of the commission. This was the greatest life insurance salesman on the West Coast. Do you know who I made appointments with? The 5 richest people I knew. If the greatest salesman on the West Coast was going to do the selling and I got the commissions, I wanted a lot of them. I never will forget, we walked into the office of the first prospect, a very successful, well-to-do man in the real estate business. I introduced Mr. Briers, the expert in the life insurance field, sat down, folded my arms, and leaned back to hear the great words of wisdom from this, the greatest life insurance salesman on the West Coast. You know what he did? He started giving those little silly canned sales talks word for word. I thought, Jerome, what's the matter with you? This is a big man. Don't use that silly stuff on him. But Jerome went right ahead. When the man objected, he used those answers to objections. When he got ready to close, he used those closes. When he asked for the check, he used those words. When he asked for 3 referred leads, he used those words. 5 times that day, I heard the greatest life insurance salesman on the West Coast, a man 62 years of age, been in the business for 33 years, use organized presentations. 4 times, I watched people buy from a stranger who had refused to buy from me, a friend. Do you know what I did that night before I went home? I went back by my office, got those things out of that bottom drawer, took them home and relearned them. And from that day till this, I have never picked up the telephone to call somebody for an appointment. I've never walked into an office or a home or had somebody into my office or home to make a presentation that I didn't know word for word what I was going to say. And selling lost all of its fear. And I heard about a life insurance salesman one time. Building. Right in the center of the lobby was a receptionist at her desk with sort of a wall built around her. He walked up to her and he said, I want to see the sales manager of this company. She said, do you have an appointment with him? He said, no. She said, you can't see him without an appointment. He said, then so that I will know who to call, will you give me his name? She gave him the name. He said, then I don't want to bother you when I come back. Will you tell me where his office is? She said, it's down this hall, the third door on the right, but you can't see him without an appointment. He said, thank you, ma'am. Walked out the door, stood outside and looked through the glass until somebody walked up in front of her so she couldn't see him, came in, walked behind her desk, walked down the hall to the sales manager's desk, walked right in the door, the sales manager at his desk working, and just stood there, didn't say a word. Sales manager looked up and said, hello. He said, hello. Sales manager went ahead working. He just stood there. Looked up again, said, did you want something? Got to help you? Well, he said, I don't think so. He said, I was just standing here wondering, you wouldn't want to buy any life insurance today, would you? He said, no, I wouldn't want to buy any life insurance today. The man just stood there. Sales manager looked up again. He said, young man, I told you I didn't want to buy any life insurance today. Well, he said, I just stand here thinking, even if you wanted to buy some, you probably wouldn't want to buy it from me, would you? He said, no, you're the last person in this world I'd want to buy anything from. Well, he said, I thought that's the way you'd feel about it before I ever came in here. And he turned around real slowly to leave. Sales manager couldn't stand it. He said, come back here. He said, I've been dealing with salespeople for 25 years, and you're the poorest excuse for a salesman I have ever seen. I'll tell you what, I feel sorry for you. I'll buy a policy from you if you'll give me 20 minutes to teach you something about salesmanship. Well, he said, I haven't got anything else to do. Guess that's all right. Took the application for the policy, got the check for the first premium, sat down to get his sales lesson. Salesman said, young man, why don't you get you some sales talks? Oh, he said, I've got a whole desk full of them back at the office. He said, then why don't you learn them? He said, I know all of them. He said, then why in the world didn't you use one when you came in here to try to sell me? He said, I did. That's the one I always use on sales managers. You see, he had an organized presentation for a particular kind of a prospect. He used it, and he made a sale. The words on these things the Southwestern Company has given you are the results of the best salespeople who have been with this company in more than 100 years. I guarantee you, those words are better than the words of anybody in this audience. The one main reason that students fail and bomb out in the first 2 or 3 weeks is because they go out there and try to use their own words. They're not prepared with their knowledge. But it isn't enough just to know the words. You have to be skilled at the use of them. How many of you would like to be able to give these approaches, sales talks, answers to objections, like the sales managers and the people who've trained you this week? Let's see your hands. You can. You know, it sounds like their words when they give them, doesn't it? But it isn't. They learned them off of a piece of paper. The reason they sound so good when they give them is because they've given them hundreds of times. Anything in this world that somebody does well is because they've practiced until they became skilled at the use of it. Do you think the knowledge alone of operating on somebody for something wrong with their body will give them success? No, they have to practice on animals and everything else until they become skilled at the use of that knife. I used to go out to Briggs Stadium in Detroit, Michigan when I lived there and watch the Tigers in batting practice. I've watched those men who were leading the American League stand in a batter's box, not in a natural position. A coach one time showed them where to put their feet. Grip a bat, not with a normal grip. A coach showed them how to grip it. Take a back swing and a cut at that ball and a follow through, not in a normal swing. A coach showed them how to do it. I've watched those men stand there and hit at hundreds of balls. Do you know what they were doing? Practicing a canned sales talk. Walk into the movie theater. Listen as that handsome young man says sweet things to a beautiful girl. Do you know what he's doing? He's giving a canned sales talk. Oh, but you girls say that comes right out of his heart. No, it doesn't. It came off of the script, a piece of paper, just like the Southwestern Company has given you. The reason it sounds like it comes out of his heart is because he did it so many times in rehearsal till it became a part of him. And you can become skilled at the use of these sales talks if you practice and practice and practice. Now, the first part of the summer, you're going to have to practice on Mrs. Jones. And don't worry about missing a word or two here and there. Mrs. Jones doesn't know the sales talk. She won't know when you missed a word. So while you're practicing, you'll earn money, and you'll become better and better and better. One of the greatest keys to success in selling is showing a tremendous interest and feeling, I want to do something for this family with the books that I have. But you can't keep your mind on that if you have to be worrying about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. But if you learn these and practice them until they become a part of you, then you can give them without giving too much thought to them. And your heart and your mind can be done in the job that you're doing for Mrs. Jones and her family. How many of you just a little bit worried about ringing the first doorbell? Would you like to lose that fear? If you will know these sales talks, these approaches, these answers to objections, so that you know everything you're going to say, if you will practice it until it becomes a part of you, selling will lose all of its fear. After all, you know everything Mrs. Jones is going to say, don't you? And you know everything you're going to say. Why should you be worried? Mrs. Jones is the one's in trouble. See, she doesn't know what either one of you are going to say. Now, you got to think of it in that way. You know what I'm doing right now? I'm giving you a canned sales talk. Oh, but you say you have done this for 30 years. Maybe I have. But in the last 2 weeks, I've listened to 10 cassettes of 10 different years that I gave this speech. And I listened to it twice this morning before I left my hotel room, so that when I walked through those curtains, I would know every word I was going to say, and how I would use my hands, and where I would put my feet. I wouldn't come out on any platform unprepared to make my presentation. If you get what you want out of the summer, in the fourth place, you need a positive mental attitude. You need to think yes, never no. You need to smile, never frown. Never get down, always stay up. I remember the first time I ever took my wife with me on a sales interview. I had an appointment with the owner of a barber shop in Oakland, California. Only had one appointment that night, 6:30. I said, you go with me, sit in the car. It'll take me 30 minutes to sell this man. Then I'll take you to dinner and a show. She thought that was a pretty good idea. When we drove up in front of the apartment, he saw us, came out and insisted my wife go in. I'm glad he did, because 3 hours later, I left the apartment. I made a sale. I got the application, I got the check. When his wife found out we hadn't eaten, she fixed us something to eat, didn't have to buy my wife's dinner. Too late to go to the show, I saved that money. I drove away from that house feeling like $1 million. My wife said, Mort, you weren't even courteous to that man. I said, what do you mean? He bought. They fed us. They want us to come back and see them. He gave me the names of 3 barbers he wants me to call on. She said, maybe he did. But he told you at least 25 times he didn't want any life insurance. And you didn't even act like you heard him. I said, I didn't. But did you notice I heard him the first time he said yes? I never earned a dime's commission in my life on a no. They don't pay you for no's. Why should I pay any attention to them? So when they say no, I just smile and keep on asking questions. Now, sometimes they will say no so many times that I have to leave without a sale. But I'm still positive. I'm even positive about the no. And I get to the door, ready to leave, turn around, take the prospect's hand, squeeze it real tightly and say, I almost forgot. I want to thank you for turning me down. And they look at me like they thought I was crazy. I say, let me tell you about my business. I have to talk to 3 people to make a sale. The last one I talked to said no. Now you've said no. That means the next one will say yes. And I want to thank you for getting me to the yes. I've had people say, come back here and sit down. They don't want to be a no. But you see, you've got to keep that positive mental attitude. Now, when I talk about positive mental thinking, I have to tell you my favorite story. There were parents had twin boys, 6 years old, extreme opposites. One of them was the world's greatest optimist. He loved everybody and everything in this world. The other little boy was the world's worst pessimist. He hated the whole world and everything in it. Didn't want anything to do with anybody or anything. The parents were so disturbed by the extreme opposite characteristics of these two children, they took them to a child psychologist. Said, "You've got to help us. We don't know what to do about these boys." He said, "I can't imagine two boys in the same family, especially twins, being such extreme opposites. But I have tests for children like this. Let's put them through the test, and then we'll talk about a remedy." So they took this little extreme pessimist down to a room that had every kind of a toy that a child could imagine. Said, "Sonny, all of these are yours. You have a good time, and we'll come back after a while." Went out and shut the door. Took this little extreme optimist down to a room that didn't have a thing in the world in it, except right in the middle of the floor was a great big pile of horse manure. Said, "Sonny, have a good time. We'll come back after a while." And went out and shut the door. In about 20 minutes, they went back into the room where the little pessimist was. He was seated in the middle of the floor with his arms folded. He hadn't touched a single thing. The psychiatrist said, "Why didn't you ride on that rocking horse?" Said, "I was afraid to fall off and break my arm." Well, so why didn't you skate on the roller skates? That'd have been fun. So I was afraid to fall down and skin my knees. Well, said, "Why didn't you blow up those balloons? They got real big and got pretty pictures on them." So I was afraid to hurt my mouth. Well, said, "Why didn't you eat some of that candy? That's good candy. All the kids like that candy." So I was afraid to get a stomachache. Well, he said, "He's in pretty bad shape. But let's go see what the other boy's doing." They went down to the other room, and when they opened that door and looked in, that kid was bent down over that horse manure, into it, clear to here. He was slinging it. He had it all over the ceiling, all over the walls, all over the floor, all over himself. The psychiatrist said, "Sonny, what in the world are you doing?" He said, "With all this manure, there's got to be a pony somewhere." I'll tell you why I told you that story. I'll let you in on a little secret. This summer, you're going to have to wade through a lot of it. But just remember, the more there is, the deeper it gets, the bigger the ponies. So keep that positive mental attitude and keep on digging, and you're going to find a lot of ponies this summer. Number 5, if you get what you want out of the summer, you have to value and manage your time. T-I-M-E. Time is the most precious thing God has given us in the material world. I can waste $1 and I can replace it. I can damage or destroy a piece of property. I can rebuild it or repair it. I can make it whole. But if I waste 1 hour of time, there isn't anything I can do about that the rest of my life. It is gone forever. I sat in Cobo Hall a number of years ago, listened to Dr. Hartzell Wilson make a speech. In that speech, he pulled from his inside coat pocket a little 3x5 card. On it, he had printed a prayer that he said he prayed every morning before he got out of bed. He read that prayer to us as he talked about the tragedy of wasting time in America. I was impressed. Went up after the speech and said, "Hartzell, could I have a copy of that poem?" He said, "Mort, this is the only one I have with me. I'm on a tour. I won't be home for about 10 days. When I get home, I'll send you one." He did. It was a postcard. He wrote a nice note on the side where he addressed it, and then the poem was on the other side. I used to carry it with me and read it to audiences, but it was printed on paper that was a little bit stiff, and the corners began to break. And I didn't want to lose it, so I put it on my desk where I could see it every time I sat down. And my dear sweet wife, about 4 or 5 years ago, took it down, had a frame about this big with 2 panes of glass, 3x5, right in the center. And she put that little poem and Hartzell's message in that and hung it right above my desk. I can read the poem, I can turn it over and read Hartzell's message. I'd like to share it with you. Dear God, this is the beginning of a new day. You have given me this day to use as I will. I want this day to be good, not evil. Success, not failure. I want it to be right, not wrong, in order that I will never regret the price that I paid for it. Can you imagine what would happen in this world if everybody felt that way about time? You can't do too much about the world, but can you imagine what will happen in your lives this summer because you feel that way about time? Don't waste a moment. The company has given you a schedule for 24 hours a day, a time to get up, a time to take a shower, a time to read or to listen to inspirational material, a time to eat breakfast, a time to ring the first doorbell, a time to come in at night, a time to go to bed. Get on schedule. The first day, don't ever get off. And that will be one of the most powerful things that you can possibly do. Value your time and manage it properly, and you'll get what you want out of the summer. 5 principles of success. Not mine, shared with me by great people, and I've just passed it on to you. Would you stand up for just a moment? Reach as high as you can reach, and just hold it there. Now, let's see how many of you can reach higher. Hold that. Now let's see how much higher you can reach. Some of you have grown 6, 8 inches. Reach real high. One more time. Now take 3 big breaths. Now sit down. Don't you feel a little better? I did that for 2 reasons. I wanted you to know that you can reach higher than you think you can this summer. And I wanted you to relax a little bit, and I wanted a few of you to wake up. When I lived in Austin, Texas, back in the 50s, we had every year a sales congress for the life insurance salespeople of that state. I was chairman of it in one year. I selected 3 great life insurance people to speak on our subject. And then as a 4th speaker, I wanted somebody to close that meeting that would build those people to heights they never dreamed were possible through motivation. And I called to my good friend Bob Richards out in Laverne, California. Bob said he would come. Bob had just returned from the Olympic Games in Melbourne, Australia. He came into Austin the afternoon before that meeting. We visited that night, and he told me some of the things that he experienced at those Olympic Games. He said, Mort, at these Olympic Games, I found 4 keys that will unlock the door into which anybody wants to get in this world. And he shared those keys with me. In the next few moments, I would like to share them with you. Key number 1, a burning desire. Wanting something so badly that you would pay any price that was right to get it. He said, Mort, I watched athletes every day strain everything they had to run faster, to jump higher, to jump farther, to ride faster in order to win. But he said the greatest example of a burning desire was a young man by the name of Tom Courtney. I said, Bob, I watched Tom qualify for the Olympic Games. Tom Courtney was not the best half-miler in America that year. But he wanted to go to the Olympic Games so badly that he ran fast enough to qualify. And Bob said once he got to Melbourne, Australia, that's all he thought about. Winning the 800-meter race. He ate it, he breathed it, he slept it. Word of this burning desire of this likable young man spread throughout the ranks of the American athletes until Bob Richards said there were more athletes from America around the track to watch that one race than any other event in all the Olympic Games that year. Bob said, I stood on the 4th curve to watch that race. I watched those runners come around that track the first time. I watched them come around the second time. And when they turned that last curve and headed down the straightaway for the tape and the finish of that race, Tom Courtney was leading by about 2.5 strides. And the cold chills just ran up and down my spine because I knew he had a great finish and he was going to realize that burning desire. But Bob said when he got almost halfway down that straightaway, my heart almost stopped because his body went down just like this. His legs gave way underneath him. Looked like he would fall. Bob said, I knew he not only wouldn't win the race, he wouldn't even finish it. 2 people passed him. And then Bob said, all of a sudden, to the cheers of that crowd, that 6-foot 2-inch frame began to straighten up. And those long legs reached out in strides farther than they had ever reached before. And nobody knew who won that race. Until after they looked at a photo finish, it showed Tom Courtney's chest hit that tape 5 inches in front of the number 2 man. And he stood on that 3rd step and listened to the Star-Spangled Banner and received the gold medal. The champion of the world. The cameraman filmed that race from a tower above and beyond the finish line. Filmed those runners as they came toward that camera and tape. When they developed the film, when Tom Courtney got close to the tape, they could see that his mouth was moving real rapidly. Out of curiosity, they made a big enlargement of the body of Tom Courtney. And from that crouched position, where he almost fell, until he hit that tape in victory, you can read on the lips of Tom Courtney these words very plainly. I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. And that burning desire gave his legs strength when they'd given out, brought him from defeat to victory. Young men and young women, I am so sold on this quality of a burning desire that I started giving scholarships, not to the students in the schools who had the greatest ability and accomplished the most, but to the students who showed the greatest desire to achieve. Maybe I'm a little selfish about that, but my mother started a brother and me to school at the same time, in the same grade. He was 16 months older than I was. In fact, he still is 16 months older than I am. But I had to go all the way through school with him, and he was a brain. He could just read a page or look at it and know everything on it. I could read it 5 times and not even know the number of the page. Do you know that all the way through grade school, junior high, high school, and the first 2 years of college, he only made 1 grade that wasn't an A, and that was a B+, and he came home and brought that report card and acted like he thought the world was coming to an end? If I'd ever gotten a B+ like he did, my folks would have known the world was coming to an end. But let me tell you something. I worked a lot harder for my B's and C's and a few D's than he did for his A's. And I'll tell you something else. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be somebody in this world who made things happen. I wanted to earn the money that my dad had not been able to earn. I wanted to have things out of this world. I wanted to be able to do for my parents and for others who were unable to do for themselves. And if I've had any success at all in this world, it has not been because of brains or ability, because I have very little of either one. It's been because I burned with a desire for it. And I still have that same desire. And I hope I never lose it. I'd like to ask you a question. How many of you really burn with a desire to succeed this summer? Let's see your hands. If you really mean that, there isn't enough power on this earth to stop you. Bob said the second key that unlocks the doors is a fighting spirit that will overcome handicaps. Bob said, I had no idea that so many of the great athletes of the world had handicaps where doctors had said they will never walk. Like they said to Rafier Johnson when he was a little boy and hurt one of his feet. He'll never walk on it. But he was the decathlon champion that year. Bob told about Shalaman, a young lady that he watched stand on the second step twice and receive gold medals in swimming. And Bob said, little did I or the crowd know as they cheered the story of a life. But he said, I sat at a dinner table with her dad a couple of nights after that, and he told the story of Shella's childhood. She had polio. She couldn't use her arms and her shoulders. She wasn't like other kids, but she wanted to be like other kids, and she fought to overcome that handicap. Her dad told about the times, many of them, that he watched her on a physical therapy table when they manipulated her arms and shoulders, and the pain was so great she cried out loud, but she didn't want them to quit. She was fighting to become like other children. And Bob said her dad told about the first time that she stood in the whirlpool waters and with her own strength and power lifted her little hands and arms above that water, and how she screamed and cried with joy, Daddy, I did it! Daddy, I did it! She didn't have a prayer to become a swimmer. but she has 2 gold medals. I wish I had time to tell you about the many, many people that I have heard about and gone to meet who have had handicaps the like of which you and I will never know. And they have become great. Johnny Erickson, Lynn Camel, 2 ladies that in their late teens were paralyzed from here down, one by polio, the other by an accident, wanted to die, but developed a desire to become somebody. And they became 2 of the finest young women in America because they fought to overcome a handicap. You may not be able to talk as well as he can. You may not have the background that he has. You may not have the ability that she has. I'm really not concerned about that. It isn't what happens to you or what will happen to you this summer that's very important. It's what you do about it. I'm concerned about one thing. Have you got the guts to fight? Because if you have, there isn't anything in this world you cannot overcome. There will be winners and losers this summer. The loser will let things happen. The winner will make things happen. The loser will say, I can't. The winner will say, I have to. I have listened to the excuses of salespeople for 48 years almost. Headache, stomachache, flat tire, too hot, rained. Ridiculous. Make things happen because you want to. And you have to for you, and you'll get what you want out of the summer. Bob said key number 3 was a striving to improve. Bobby Morra from Abilene Christian University was the greatest starter the sprint world has ever known. He came up out of the block straighter and faster than anybody. He didn't have the speed of other runners, but he won 3 gold medals at those Olympic Games. If he'd ever had the speed, or if John Carlos or some of those others had had the start that he had, they would run an 8 flat 100-meter dash. But Bob said Bobby Morra used to have him go out and watch him practice the start of the sprints. Said he would get down on the blocks, Bob would clap his hands, Bobby Morra would come out of those blocks, run out about 20 yards, come back and say, what did I do wrong? And Bob said, Morty, it was so good, all I could say was, Bobby, it was perfect. And he said, Bobby would say, I didn't ask you what was good about it. How can I make it better? The next time I saw Bobby Morra was in a bank where he was working in Houston, Texas. And I told him what Bob Richards had said about him. Bobby said, Mort, whether it's as a businessman, a runner on the track, a student in school, a husband, a father, a neighbor, a citizen, a Christian, if I don't try to be better today than I was yesterday, and better tomorrow than I am today, I'm not the kind of a person God wants me to be. Because the Bible says, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven. We will never reach that perfection. But if we strive toward it, we will get more. Make the last 2 weeks of the summer the very best. No matter how much you sell the first week, make next week the better one. And the next week better, and the next one. And make the last 2 weeks of the summer the very best in selling of your whole summer. Win that I Want to Win award. If there were 2 things that I could select as my 2 most powerful tools for a good summer, it would be to win the success coin and get the right start, and the I Want to Win award and have the right finish, and you won't have to worry about what's in between. There are so many places, young people, at the tops of the ladders in the corporations of America, just waiting for somebody like you who develops the ability and the desire and the quality to improve in life. If you will develop this habit this summer, you will be a wanted and demanded person in this world. because corporations are looking for people like that. Number 4. Bob said the 4th key that I found that unlocks the doors was a genuine faith in God. Young people, I would not for anything in this world try to dictate religion to anybody. But I think it would be unfair to you if I did not tell you what my faith in God has meant to me, even in business. I sat a number of years ago, in fact a lot of years ago, in an auditorium in Dallas, Texas at the Statler Hilton Hotel when it was first built, in a big ballroom with 1,500 other people, and listened to Dr. Kenneth McFarland. And he made this statement. He said, faith in God to the salesperson is like the flange on the wheel of a train. It keeps it on the track when it goes around the curve. I'd never seen the wheel of a train up close before that, but at the next opportunity I did. And on the inside of the wheel, there's a flange on either side. And no matter whether the train goes around the track, the curve this way or this way, that flange keeps the wheels from going off the track. You will have a lot of rough curves this summer. You will have a lot rougher curves throughout your life. If you have a genuine faith in God, it'll keep you on the track. Now I think about my faith and describe it maybe a little different than most people. When I was a little boy, my daddy worked in a grocery store. We didn't have a car. There weren't very many back in those days, and we had no money to buy one. We walked every place. I used to persuade my mother to let me stay at the store until late at night, and then when Dad closed the store, I would walk home with him. The last 2 blocks of that walk home, my dad would cut off a lighted street and go down a dark alley. Now, had I been in that dark alley by myself, every noise would have either just petrified me and paralyzed me so I couldn't move, or else sent me off like a rocket, I don't know which. But when I turned off of this lighted street, where I walked with my arms down by my side like the great big brave boy that I really wasn't, to go down that dark alley with my daddy, I used to take my little hand, slide it up his leg, and take hold of his 2 big fingers. And even though he has been dead for about 22 years, I can close my eyes right now, and I can still feel him push my little hand away from his fingers and take his great big hand and put it around my little fist and squeeze it real tightly. And I knew he wouldn't let anything hurt me. Young people, many years ago, through faith in the Bible, I reached up and took hold of God's hand. And as long as I hold on to it, I can believe and depend on what he said. That I can cast all my care upon him because he cares for me. That if he's with me, who can be against me? That he will never leave me. He will never forsake me. And even in business, I can do all things through him who strengtheneth me. I believe all of this and a lot more because he's God the Almighty, and I'm his child, and I know that he loves me. Necessary for success in business? No. But I'm so confident that my faith in God on so many occasions has wrapped itself around all of these other principles and brought them into my life with a greater effect. And I believe it will for you. I've added a 5th to Bob Richards' keys to success. And you can write this down in words very easy to understand. Don't quit. Don't quit. One of the greatest statesmen that this world has ever known was Winston Churchill, England's prime minister. At one time in his life, when he felt all was a failure, and he wasn't going to run for office, and late at night told his wife that the next morning he was withdrawing. And she smiled and put her hand on his shoulder and said, Winston, never give up. He said he thought about those 2 words all night long. And the next morning, he reaffirmed his candidacy. And throughout his life, his favorite statement was, never give up. Stay with it. Stay with it. I remember in a room in a hotel that no longer is in Nashville, 30 years ago, I made a statement that if anybody was going to quit and go home, they could call me collect. And I asked for a promise that they would. Well, they all raised their hands. About 10 days later, my phone rang at 2:30 in the morning. Collect call. I took the call. A young man very rapidly said, Mr. Utley, I'm going to quit and go home. I've already packed my bags. Don't try to talk me out of it. I've already called my folks, told them I was coming. I said, slow down a little bit. I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. If you want to quit and go home, that's your business. Have you sold many books? He'd just sold 2 or 3. And that really wasn't too good. So I said, if you want to quit and go home, that's your business. But before you do, I want you to know one thing. If you quit and go home, every time you look in the mirror the rest of your life, you're going to be looking at a quitter. Now, if that won't bother you, that's not going to bother me. Because when I look in the mirror, I won't see you. I failed at a lot of things, I told him, but not as a quitter. And he was so serious and so down, I thought he ought to laugh a bit. So I told him about the time in college that I was running a half mile. And I got so far behind everybody else, I cut across the stadium. And if you think that's funny, I didn't even catch up then. But I went across the finish line. I finished. Well, he laughed a little bit, told me goodbye. He didn't go home. He was in the top 10 out of about 400 students that summer. He was in the top 10 5 years in a row. He became a millionaire by the time he was 31 or 2 years old. Today he's worth between 40 and 50 million. He has told me on many occasions, Mort, if you had allowed me to quit and go home, I probably would have developed the habit of quitting when things got tough, because it was tough. And he said it was tough the rest of the summer, and it was tough the next 4 summers. But I stayed with it and didn't give up. And I've developed the habit in my life of never giving up when things are tough. There was a life insurance salesman, Houston, Texas. Great guy, became a great salesman. Came into the life insurance business from being an accountant. A manager saw him and talked him into trying the life insurance business. He lasted about 3 or 4 months and quit. Another manager saw him a few months later, talked him into trying it again. This time he lasted 9 or 10 months and quit. About a year later, another manager saw him. He must have had something. They all thought he would make a good life insurance salesman. Mentioned life insurance to him, and Bud threw up his hands and says, don't mention that business to me. I've been in it twice. I've failed twice. I've quit twice. I'll never try it again. The man was so convinced that Bud Bray would make a good life insurance man that he tried a little psychology on him. He said, knew he was a golfer. He said, do you remember Benny Hogan? Bud says, everybody knows Benny Hogan. He said, remember he had that bus automobile crash? The doctor said he may never walk again, but he won't play golf for sure. But he said, Bud, Benny Hogan refused to quit. He came back and won his greatest tournaments after that accident. He knew Bud liked music. He said, do you remember Jane Froman? Well, he said, everybody knows Jane Froman. In my day and Bud's day, Jane Froman was the best girl vocalist of the day. He said, remember, she was going to entertain our service people in the early 40s during World War II. There was a plane crash on the beach. A fire followed. Almost lost her life, did lose a leg, but she refused to quit. She came back and entertained her greatest audiences on an artificial limb. They made a movie of her life. Susan Hayward starred. But when it came time for the music, Susan Hayward just mouthed the words, and they used the recorded voice of the great Jane Froman. And the whole world remembers her. He said, Bud, do you remember Herman Osgood? He said, I never heard of him. He said, neither did anybody else. He quit. Neither did anybody else. He quit. The world doesn't remember a quitter. And quitters don't win. And winners don't quit. I'd like to ask you one more question. This will be a tough summer. Some of you will not start as fast as others, and the first 3 weeks may be disastrous. But if you'll do what you're trained to do and the way you're trained to do it, you will enjoy it. The only time you won't enjoy it is when you try to do it your way and not the company's way. And I've been in selling for a lot of years. I know what I'm talking about. So if you go out there and do it this, and it'll be tough, But how many of you are going to do it regardless of how tough it is and stay all summer long? Now that's a promise to you, not to me, because you don't owe me a promise. But don't ever break a promise to yourself. 5 principles of success. 5 keys that unlock the doors. If you will commit yourself to put those together and bring them into your lives with real commitment. Do you know what real commitment is? Let me give you an illustration that I think is the finest illustration I ever heard of real commitment. In 1970, on November the 8th, Tom Dempsey with the New Orleans Saints kicked the longest field goal that's ever been kicked in professional football. That story was on the headlines of every sport page in America on Monday morning. A minister in Minneapolis saw it, called the New Orleans Saints office to ask when they were going to practice. They said, Tuesday we start. Bought a plane ticket, flew to New Orleans, went out to the stadium and sat and for 30 or 40 minutes watched Tom Dempsey practice kicking field goals. Went down on the sideline and said, young man, could I talk to you? Tom came over to the side. He said, I've just been amazed at sitting up there watching you with that half of a foot, just a stub on his right foot, kick a ball farther and straighter than anybody in pro football. And I was amazed when I read in the newspaper what happened. Tell me how you kicked that football so far. Tom said, I just kicked it, that's all. No, he said, I paid for a plane ticket to come down here. I want to know everything that happened. When you were on the sideline and the coach told you to go in, what did you think? He said, I thought we were 2 points behind. A few minutes to go, if I could put that ball through those uprights, even though nobody's ever kicked it that far before, we'd win that ball game. The minister said, what did you say in the huddle? He said, I told those guys if they'd block that line out, I'd put that ball through those uprights and we'd win that game. He said, what happened when you broke huddle? He said, I measured my distance back 3 steps from where the quarterback would touch that ball to the ground, so that when I took 2 steps and swung this stub, it would touch that ball at the very moment the end of it touched the ground. He said, then what happened? Well, he said, I kicked it. He said, anything else? Tom said, yeah. When my foot touched that ball, I threw my whole body into it. The minister said, Jesus said that 2,000 years ago. Tom said they didn't even have football. The minister said, Jesus said, whosoever will lose his life for mine, throw his whole self into my life, he will find a better life. And he said, young man, in whatever you do in life, whether it's play, work, charity, worship, whatever it is, do it with all your might. There's a time for everything. But whatever you're doing, give it all you've got. You'll be successful. That's real commitment. So this summer, throw your whole self into it. If you'll do the things you've been trained this week, in the way you have been trained to do them, with a positive mental attitude and stay all summer, you'll have the greatest summer you've ever had in all of your life. God bless you.